Hey guys, welcome back to One Candle Society for another One Candle Paranormal case file. Here with your host, Vic Whately.
And Marcus D. And a big shout out to our newest patron, Ricky. Thank you so much for becoming a patron.
So everybody, grab your favorite H.P. Lovecraft novel and come along with us as we discuss the Nameless Horror of Berkeley Square.
Constructed in 1740, the house of 50 Berkeley Square over the years has gained a dark reputation as one of the most haunted houses in all of Britain. Paranormal phenomena at the house have ranged from ghost sightings, bizarre occult rituals, to even horrific cryptid encounters. The number of paranormal stories associated with the home are so numerous it's often difficult to know where exactly to start. The first story begins in 1789, when a woman named Adeline was found dead on the pavement outside the home. Rumors in the town were that she jumped to escape the horrors inflicted by an abusive uncle. Soon thereafter, residents of the town claimed to see a spectral woman dangling from the ledge of the home. Residents of the home also reported seeing a spectral woman roaming the halls of the home, crying in agony. This isn't the only ghost seen in the home. Other residents to the house reported seeing the ghost of a small girl roaming the halls of the house. Many residents of the town believed that the girl had been murdered by her nanny. In 1827, the home was purchased by a woman named Elizabeth Curzon. Miss Curzon rented the home to a man named Thomas Myers. Myers, after being left at the altar by his fiancée, would become a recluse and would only ever be seen moving around at night. This began the rumors that Myers may be dabbling in the occult in order to win back his lost fiancée. By 1840, the tales of the mysterious entity that we know now as the Nameless Horror of Berkeley Square started to appear. A young man named Thomas Warboys left a local tavern. He drunkenly stumbled up to the home and demanded to stay at the home to show some of his friends that he wasn't scared of the dark tales surrounding the home. The landlord agreed, but only under two terms: that Warboys sleep armed and pull an emergency cord in the room attached to a bell in case he needed assistance in the night. It wasn't more than an hour into the night that the landlord heard the bell frantically ringing. When he arrived, he found Warboys in a traumatized state with an empty gun pointed at the wall. Warboys fled into the night terrified and was never able to fully describe what he saw that fateful night. Almost 30 years later, another man named Lord George Littleton braved to spend the night in the same room. The Lord and politician was also an avid writer in the paranormal, and he wanted to get to the bottom of what was haunting the home on Berkeley Square. In the middle of the night, Littleton was awoken by a strange noise and grabbed his rifle. He heard the noise again coming from a darkened corner in the room. As Littleton aimed his rifle, a brown mass of tentacles sprang from the corner. Littleton fired at the creature, and in a flash of light and smoke, the creature was gone. When everything settled, the only evidence of the encounter was a small trail of sludge and a massive hole in the wall. A few years later, the home was purchased by another landlord. The landlord hired a maid who agreed to work in the home under the condition that her fiancé also be allowed to live inside the home. One night, everyone in the home was awoken to the sound of the maid screaming. When they found her, she was curled up in a ball on the floor screaming, "Don't let it get me! Don't let it get me!" A doctor was summoned to the home, but the maid couldn't be consoled. She was later committed to the local sanatorium. A day or so later, her fiancé was found in the same room with a single self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. One of the most famous stories surrounding the home came in December of 1887. Two sailors, Robert Martin and Edward Blunden, from the warship HMS Penelope, with nowhere to stay, rented a room in the upstairs of the home. As they slept, Blunden was awoken by the sound of something moving in the room. When he looked, he saw a small black shapeless mass heading for Martin. Grabbing a metal poker in the room, Blunden turned back to defend his friend. Threatened, the creature turned and lunged at Blunden. Martin awoke to the terrified screams of Blunden as the creature wrapped its tentacles around his neck. Horrified at the sight of the creature strangling his friend, Martin fled into the night and returned shortly later with police. When Martin and the police returned, they found his friend's body lying dead outside the front door. Martin was arrested and interviewed regarding Blunden's death, but was later released and no further charges were ever filed. Nor was there any other explanation given to what happened that fateful night.
Okay, so that was a bit of a abridged history of the place. The history of this place actually goes on and on and on. A little more than we wanted to get into just in the intro, but there's been a lot of stuff that's happened here. Reports of thumpings and hauntings. There are stories involving young men getting locked up in the cellars because they're mentally insane and being left down there for years at a time. Their only interaction being a sliding door being opened to push the food in.
One of the things that jumped out at me that I really liked was people claiming that the house on Berkeley Square was the center for occultic activity back in the day. Like weird rituals and bizarre rites were being done in the attic or the basement or some other rooms within the house to explain why all the bizarre happenings were going on in the house.
Yeah, I really love that story. It involves a young man who gets left on his wedding day and then returning to the home, turning to the occult to win back his lost lover.
But it also kind of reminds me too about the Satanism scare back in the 1980s here in the United States, where everybody was absolutely terrified of that, and that was the explanation for paranormal happenings and hauntings all over the U.S.
But at that, we're talking about England. This is one of the last European countries to have an actual court wizard for their royalty.
Well, I mean, it's also a common explanation for why things in the paranormal happen is that people were just delving into bizarre occult things, and then they tapped into something that they shouldn't have. I mean, if you look at the house and photos of it, it's all dilapidated. It looks like the kind of house of a weird wizard or somebody who's probably dabbling in the occult might live. That's probably even, that could even explain why people were targeting it.
And even in the story, it kind of sounds like this is just something people assumed about him, since he pretty much switched to a nocturnal lifestyle, just started skulking around, stopped going out. I could really see this being rumors made up by the neighbors, but at the same time, there is a lot of connection between occultic activity and paranormal phenomena.
But the oddities at night could be explained by something else too. This is something that I found when I was researching it too. A famous UK paranormal investigator, Harry Price, said that one of the reasons about why stuff could be going on at night and stuff could be because of smugglers or counterfeiters doing stuff at night, and they came up with all these bizarre stories and rumors or whatever as a way to keep people away from the house.
Oh no, I read the same story, and he was relating the sort of thumping sounds to being like the sounds of moving counterfeit equipment and things, and it was a very Scooby-Doo mystery sort of thing.
Yeah, I know, but if you're trying to keep people away from when you're doing shady stuff, you know, coming up with people dying or being attacked by horrific ghosts might be the way to go. One of the most peculiar things about the Nameless Horror of Berkeley Square is when you're looking up the different accounts of the different stories of the people that have stayed the night there, have had things, you will find variations in the stories very easily.
Yeah, sometimes it seems that they're describing a apparition similar to a ghost, and other times they're describing like a amorphous fog, and other times it seems to be some sort of tentacled creature. And there's more variation in it than you can really ascribe to just the shock of seeing something unknown.
And I got kind of frustrated a little bit when we were researching the story too, because to me the devil's always in the details. When you're trying to explain something or you're trying to get to the bottom of something, and when you're looking at several different stories with several different variations, it's really hard. Like, I think it was even hard for us to even do the history in this, because we had to come up with what variation of the story are we going to tell?
At least supposedly, this was ran in some of the tabloid-esque sort of newspapers in the area, and some of the issues could be coming from kind of a game of telephone combined with each newspaper trying to come up with the more sensational version of the story, and I think that might be what's contributing to some of the confusion. But one of my favorite descriptions is this hazy, shadow-like person with tentacles coming out and claws and talons and basically all the best traits of a monster, all rolled into one.
It's a very unique cryptid. I mean, it's not like any ghost or haunting story that you're going to find almost anywhere else. Like, I had a hard time trying to compare the story to anything else that we've ever covered or we've ever heard of. It definitely makes it very unique when you look at it from that angle.
Some of the consistencies that you can kind of pick out among the multiple stories that seem to be more consistent is that it has something to do with kind of a foggy or inky sort of aspect to it that is dark or sometimes dark brown, and that it has this association with tentacles or something reaching out of the darkness.
But even though we're going back and forth on what the thing may look like, all of the accounts after that are still generally the same. The details of what the person did or what happened after them, like them going crazy, them dying, whatever, that's all generally consistent. So for this particular video, I think it's important to kind of look at the MO or the behavior, the MO of the entity in the house.
One of the things I thought was really, really fascinating, just kind of looking over some of this stuff, is that it almost always comes from the corner of the room. And I thought that was a neat little detail. It's almost like something ripped straight from a H.P. Lovecraft novel. And there's a lot of details in this that seem like they're ripped straight from an H.P. Lovecraft novel. But this is before he started writing.
But it wasn't really outside of what people were doing at the time. I mean, if you look at the stories of the two sailors, that came from Elliot O'Donnell, who was a fiction writer at the time, or he was a ghost writer at the time. He was collecting all these different ghost stories. He was the one that comes forward with the accounts of these two sailors and describing their accounts when they were there. And he wrote tons and tons of ghost stories and things like that.
Yeah, this is actually not too far from the starting of the bizarre horror sort of movement, but most of it wasn't really in circulation, or at least wasn't popular at this point.
No, it wasn't, but it might explain why we're seeing this variation, because Lovecraft comes about 10 years after Eliot starts writing these things. Eliot starts writing this about 1904. Lovecraft comes about 1912, 1916, so somewhere in that time frame.
I think one of his earliest published works was The Alchemist, and I believe it was 1919.
Maybe this is a reason about why we're seeing these different conflicting descriptions of the entity.
Like, the writing is flowing into them through kind of what the zeitgeist of the times is. But we could also take it the other way and say maybe stories like this are what influenced the early writers of bizarre horror.
One thing I really wanted to look at for this video was what's going on with the house now. What is it now? Well, today it's actually a bookstore. It's called Mag's Bookstore. They bought it back the 1930s. So
and if you're thinking about going and visiting, sorry guys, they're not going to let you.
Yeah, the new owners of the building are really trying to downplay the place being haunted. But a weird thing is you cannot actually go and investigate or even go into the top floor of the building where supposedly so many of these things actually happened. It's actually locked, and there's a sign posted saying that no one's allowed to go in, including employees. Supposedly, it can't even be used for storage. But that hasn't actually stopped there being stories of the paranormal going on in the building still. Some of the employees have reported seeing this weird brown mist floating through some of the parts of the store. One of the cleaning ladies there said that she felt a ghost following her around the whole time. Some people have even reported poltergeist activity where glasses or books have been flung off the walls and all the way across the room. It sounds like there's some stuff that's still going on there.
Due to the difficulties with its description, coming up with a lore that fits this thing is kind of hard. My first thought is, if we're thinking about the English Isles, we might be talking about something out of the fae or fairy sort of domain. And besides that, fairies are known for being shapeshifters, and we're having a hard time pinning down its description. As well as, there's a lot of tendencies in this story to lean towards that this creature's wanting to cause madness and insanity within the people who are experiencing it, and that's within the folkloric vein of the Fae. But all in all, I couldn't trace it down to any specific sort of Fae that fits this sort of MO, this sort of shape-shifting, so it's kind of hard. I have heard people argue that we might not be talking about an apparition-esque sort of thing, that we might be talking about some sort of cryptid creature, but it's hard to think of a cephalopod, even if they're feeding like some sort of mutated octopus in the sewers living off the rat population. It's hard to think of that then climbing out and going to the second floor of the specific building to scare people. And why is an octopus, even if it's a land-based one, going to attack a much larger human? It's not like it's going to sit there and feed off of it. It's really hard to place this in a specific lore sort of vein.
I guess one could argue that this is an incredibly powerful ghost haunting. I mean, there's several stories of people dying at the location and then people being haunted by these apparitions of these people later. There were some other things that jumped out at me that kind of made me look at a different angle, sort of. If you look at the description of people saying that it's this black, shadowy figure that's creating this intense, paralyzing fear, almost to the point of madness, it almost could be a really intense shadow person haunting.
This wouldn't be the first time I've ever heard of an apparition that can manifest itself in different ways to make itself more frightening or to instill terror in a victim. These stories are not incredibly common, but they do exist out there.
But when we did our original video on shadow people, we talked about one of the things that shadow people are drawn to are places of intense trauma and places of intense sadness and things. And one of the things they will do is they will create this paralyzing fear in people. So that's why I kind of had to lean towards that.
The weird thing is, once again, the most accurate connection in history is more or less the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. And I would be very tempted to say that this is something generated from that, but it seems like the story likely predates it. Let's look into the first major case, the War Boys case. It seems very real, like something that could happen. You're out drinking with your mates, ghost stories pop up, you call them poppycock, and they dare you to go and to live up on your word. You go to try to prove them wrong. Now, I don't think I'd go so far to go and barge my way in and demand interest. What about you, Marcus?
No, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be doing that. But I don't think I'm going to be daring Vic for you to be going to stay somewhere where I think you may end up dead.
And I would probably do it, except for I don't really like trespassing all that much.
It's like, you see that haunted house over there? Just go knock and stay by yourself in there. But even if you were, I'd probably end up going along just because I wouldn't want you to be able to see all this stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I'd come back with all the good stories and leave you out of it.
No, actually, probably if the two of us win, we'd probably end up like the sailor story where one of us ends up with something horrible happening to him.
One of the things I like about these stories is almost everyone thinks to bring a gun or a weapon of some sort.
Yes, I was just thinking that back in season 2, or even in season 1, so many of these stories that I kept first hearing, I'm like, how come nobody's ever just shooting at the thing? And almost every one of these stories has somebody going trying to take it out.
Yeah, I think in the War Boys story, I think the person who owned the house might have given him the gun and insisted. I think it depends on what version you read, but yeah, he brings a pistol.
The Littleton story, he brings a shotgun. Like he wasn't playing around.
And the best part is, sometimes it seems to react to the physical attacks. Like I believe in the story with the two sailors. Mm-hmm. Doesn't he knock it across the room with just some debris he finds in the room?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost makes you wonder, that's the one thing that makes me think this really doesn't sound like a traditional ghost. You don't normally hear about someone hitting a ghost and them reeling back.
And something that I wanted to point out too, the War Boys story that we need to remember is a lot of the skeptics or people that try to give a mundane explanation to this. They claim that the reason why everybody's seeing all this stuff is because the tenant Thomas Myers who was living there, was like a night owl, and he was staying up all the time. The Warboy story happens in 1840, people. Thomas Myers doesn't move into the home until 1859. So people were shooting in this apparition almost 20 years before before he even gets there.
As far as what I think this is, what I really want to say is the guy dabbling in the occult ripped asunder something in the veil, and we have weird things coming through now. The problem is the timeline doesn't fit. People were seeing these bizarre apparitions before that. So what I'm going to have to go with is more along the lines of, I think this is one of those nexuses. Like, if I was going to say it flowery, it's one of those places where the veil between the worlds is thin and things can come through. Keel talked about these, calling these window zones, and history's littered with special places where strange things can happen. It seems like there's a lot of different bizarre phenomena, and it all just seems to mesh up over this property. And I think this just might be one of those special places where strange and peculiar things, extraordinary things can just happen.
When I think of the Nameless Horror of Berkeley Square story, I kind of fall into the same camp as Vic. I think what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with a place where there are several different things in the paranormal that have kind of converged on one place. If you look at all of the different explanations of the hauntings, a young woman who had committed suicide by jumping off the roof, a little girl murdered by a servant in the house, some bizarre entity coming from another dimension due to occult activity, what have you. All of these explanations have stories that corroborate this. There are people that claim they saw the ghost of the woman who leapt to her death, dangling from the windowsill. People report seeing the little girl wandering in the attic with their hands shaking. All of the stories of the people staying at the home shooting at this bizarre black apparition that comes at them. All these people are seeing all of these different things. And that's probably why the story is called The Nameless Horror of Berkeley Square. Because you can't name it because it's not one thing.
I almost wonder if me and Marcus were to go there and start flipping a coin, if it wouldn't just land on its side every time. It just seems like the sort of place where amazing things happen.
But leave your thoughts on it in the comments below.
Hey guys, and thank you for tuning in to our most recent One Candle Paranormal case file.
This was such an awesome topic to do. It was so funny because whenever we were trying to come up with what to do, Vic always called this this haunted horror thing. I don't know the name of it. I don't look up the name.
Yeah, I've wanted to do this one for a while, but I could never remember what it was called, mainly because it's nameless, I guess. But then one of our fans threw it in the request box, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that thing. That's that thing I've been talking about.
If you guys have an idea for a video, don't forget to leave it in the comments below. We always love taking requests from fans for different videos.
And if you enjoyed it, give it a like, a share, a subscribe, hit that bell icon so you get notified when we put out new content, and also consider becoming a patron. We really, really love our patrons.
Yeah, if you're becoming a patron today, you can get access to videos that we exclusively make just for our patrons. But don't forget, keep believing.
'Cause we'll keep listening.